I think we don't. We don't have
No, I
them.
think we should just start.
Okay,
Yeah, we should
cool.
just start.
Okay, I think we are live. So welcome back everyone to the FPL script. I am Fran, of course, FPL underscore Fran on Twitter with my co-host JD today. We will be discussing, briefly our wild card, or my wild card 26, but our performance overall on Gaming 26 and the culmination of the FA Cup fixtures and how that changes our understanding of the FPL landscape. But I think the biggest thing that we'd like to talk about today too is, to reintroduce basically what we do over the course of the show as a new segment called the xMins Corner. So that will be where we will probably discuss the preeminent, I guess, xMins debates that would change, your solves and your wild cards and things like that, and how we're sort of thinking about the picks of certain minutes going forwards. So that's going to be the new segment. So do stay tuned for that. We will be talking about chip strategy once again, but very briefly. I think people's chip strategies are not set in stone. It's really team dependent, in my opinion, once again. And a lot of people have already been sort of planning towards a certain strategy in mind. And of course, I think when they're, for example, running their solves, it will probably bear out the same. But yeah, in terms of my team, I had 46 points. I did wild card, so pretty traumatic experience. Wild carding, having pretty good EV, knowing that I would have a strong team versus the field, but it didn't pan out. And part of that too is just whenever we go on wild cards or we play, analytically, you choose, let's say, a variation of players, and you hope that they do the business in terms of converting their EV. And obviously the team that I sort of ended up with at the deadline was quite different to different variations, where I had, for example, Ait Nuri, Udogi, for example, these sorts of players that would have been, helpful to me this week and helpful to me last week. Unfortunately, I did end up with Neto and Huang, and also Fernandes, who I guess got a very paltry assist and a yellow card. But that literally was the highlight of my week. All the other picks, all the other points that I had, were very much dominated by the field or owned by the field. And, I didn't even have the chance, or I didn't even think about really the chance to go for a bit of free risk with the Saka captaincy. So not something I really considered. I have to put my hands up there. And that was my week. How about you, JD?
Hi everyone. So just to give a heads up that my video is not working great. So as you can see right now, I'm frozen. So that could occur many times during the stream today. Apologies for that. So just like Fran, I had a bad week and I had a pretty big red arrow considering where I was last week. And there is nothing really to speak about except I went Wang over Douglas Lewis, and my contempt for Douglas Lewis grows even more.
Yeah.
And it's really I'm running out of words, honestly. Even when I think about it, I'm happy that we did the double over Villa, because he would have been just insufferable. And I'm talking about Douglas Lewis, the streamer, not Douglas Lewis, the football player. So, he is a colleague and I can talk about him. I can talk smack about him.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So we did touch on FA Cup in terms of the opening segment. The reality is that we do have a small understanding or better understanding of Game Weeks 34 and 37. Game Week 29 is already set in stone, so we don't really need to discuss that. The only thing that we know is that Luton versus Nottingham Forest has been confirmed, so we now have 4 fixtures there. It doesn't really change strategy much, but I think it obviously does open some options in terms of your keepers now. Planning forwards. Kaminsky, of course, is a very valid pick, particularly on a wild card. On top of that, I think generally the idea that you can bring in a Luton player, whether it's a Luton forward, whether it's Ross Barkley, or whether it's Doughty right now, I think once again very strong if you are planning on, let's say, going through and navigating a free hit 34 strategy path. So that's one thing that has sort of come up as a result of the fixtures in the FA Cup. However, we have presented a sort of binary understanding of 34 and 37. This is based on Planet FPL's projections. I do recommend that everyone has a looking for Planet FPL on YouTube or any sort of podcast platform. Have a listen to their discussions on the fixtures, and also give James a follow as well on Twitter. So a lot of the credit goes to him. Keep in mind, though, of course, Ben Krellin has his own projections. These are, of course, a binary set of projections. So assuming, for example, that let's say, for example, if you look at Ben Crellin's projections, they're always 66% on GameWeek 34 or 33% on GameWeek 37. Here, of course, we are taking the best guess of where fixtures should fall. If we were to, let's say, solve and assume that fixtures do fall on a specific game week. And I think the key to using binary solves is, I think it actually shows you the true value of a potential 3 at 34. Now, we're not saying that this is going to be perfect in terms of all these fixtures that we show here are going to happen on 34 or going to happen on 37, as we say. It could be flipped. But the idea, I think, is that when you're running solves with the partial expected value that you have for the fixture probabilities now with default fixture projections on review, you won't see the full value of a free at 34, no matter what. So I think when people are, let's say, comparing free at 29 as a strategy to 3 at 34, I think that's one thing that a lot of people do tend to miss out on, that those partial solves actually affect the game weeks where you have a lot of players playing already, and sort of nerf the value of a free hit there compared to one where we have a blank game week instead. So that's the only thing I'd like to mention. I don't know if you want to add any thoughts, because obviously you are an avid Planet FPL listener, and you've given some time dedicated to listening to that episode.
Yeah, and James has been very vocal about the fact that there could be a lot of changes to this still.
Yeah.
So, as Fran said, this is our best guess as of today, and which is why we are not going to spend a lot of time talking about chip strategies, because once again, we don't have enough information other than what we already know,
Mm-hmm.
which is the fact that only four fixtures are going to be played in Game Week 29 and others are going to be moved ahead. So, two quick things. As Fran already mentioned, please go and watch the Planet FPL pod about fixtures. But one thing that James mentioned, which is not common knowledge, I guess, other than outside of people who've listened to the pod, which is that Everton Liverpool was supposed to be scheduled in 34, but he's now predicting it to be 37 because he's apparently, like, he's received inside information essentially, and he's saying that Sky want to make it sort of a blockbuster because it is probably going to be Everton's last game at Goodison Park if they lose and get relegated, for example. So it could be a case where it's a relegation for Everton and it's the title for Liverpool, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that is sort of the logic behind it. Of course, I'm not claiming to be an expert. This is just something I heard and sort of made sense because they are obviously the broadcasting companies over in the UK are always trying to maximize the revenue in terms of viewership. So it does make sense. But what James also said is that in terms of arranging the police or stewards in the ground, it's going to be a real pain, a real hassle. So I have no idea what decision they're going to take. Whatever they do, I guess it doesn't matter that much from a solving perspective because either Fulham gets scheduled for Liverpool or Everton gets scheduled, and in terms of EV, it's not that big of a difference. If one solve is going to tell you to own Salah, I'm sure the other solve within the reason is still going to tell you to own Salah. In for example, double game week 34, if that happens. So maybe not as relevant to your solves, but just something to keep an eye out. And if you have an update, or if we hear about an update, we will obviously cover it in future episodes. So that's one. And just to add to what Fran said in the beginning of the podcast about xMins, so it's just that for example, Fran, I know, who spends a lot of time running solves with his own minutes, and we do talk about it often during various segments of the podcast. So we just decided to have like a dedicated segment where we can just talk about it. Obviously, when we have podcasts that don't have chip strategies, it could be the case that we sprinkle these xmin stats throughout the podcast. But for episodes like these where there's not much going on outside of maybe some people playing their wild card or some people planning to play their wild card next week. Like for example, maybe I am playing my wild card next week. So in weeks like these, I think it helps to just have all the Xmas chat in one section of the podcast. So this is exactly what we're trying to do. And speaking of which, let's start off with the first one, which is Bournemouth defense. So you wildcarded last week, so I'm going to start with you. What are your thoughts on the Bournemouth defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you should be picking between Senesi and Zabarni, although I think if you are a bit of a terrorist and you like a bit of upside, I quite like Kirkez, the left back.
Yeah.
But the reality too is if you can go for example, Neto, the goalkeeper, that's where the full sort of I think strength of the double game week lies because Senesi is the one who usually has the better underlying stats. But when we talk about xMins, it is now the case that he gets subbed off sometimes quite early, just because if Bournemouth want to chase, it seems like that they sort of move into a structure where Cook basically drops back into a center back position and they play out of the back with Zabarni. And you think that these fixtures are actually very good and you think that there's not going to be any struggles really with Bournemouth sort of managing this tie or these ties, then in reality, you're going to prefer going for someone like Senesi for the full upside of the sort of attacking player. But Zabarni for me still feels like the safest pick if that's how you like to grab your EV. And that's sort of my take on Bournemouth right now. Whereas with Kirkes as well, he could be prone to being an early sub or, of course, maybe even missing a game.
Yeah. Lloyd Kelly's absence is still
Yeah.
unexplained, right? In terms of when is he coming back exactly?
Yeah, I mean, we still haven't seen him at the squad at all, right? And
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, obviously we can wait for an update. But obviously, if let's say he's been out for a while, I think Senesi therefore feels quite safe. But yeah, if I was to pick one between Zabarni and Senesi, I would actually probably go Zabarni because
Oh, no, I actually didn't mean for Senesi. I actually meant it for
oh, sorry, in
Kirkes.
terms of the Kirkes, yeah, in terms of left back
Yeah.
position. Sorry, I was actually
Yeah.
thinking about who's the center back option that they usually have.
I think Lloyd Kelly was also slated if they need to
Yeah, because we
play
we have
use
haven't yeah
him as well.
we have seen
Yes.
Kelly play left center back,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that would be
And
interesting.
the other option is Adam Smith, but obviously Max Aarons is their first choice right back. I don't think he is going to be fit either, but Bournemouth fans still don't seem to think he's going to play both games, and he hasn't been attacking at all in any case. So uh, maybe he would be below Zabarni for my preferences. And as Farhan has already pointed out, that Zabarni is probably the one safe pick right now from all those defenders for xMins. The next point was about Bournemouth mids because for people who want to maximize game week 28, which is obviously a double game week for Bournemouth and Liverpool, Luton, what are your thoughts about, for example, Tavernier versus Clivert versus someone like Ryan Christie, who you know is going to play 90 minutes, but I mean, it doesn't really have any attacking output.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of talk about attacking output because when we talk about most of the players that they actually have in their team, Marcus Tavernier is the only one who actually has like considerably good XGI per 90 and considerably good minutes.
Hmm.
So that's my main concern. And then actually the next best player would be probably Semenyo, right? In terms of decent minutes and decent XGI, but he's a forward. And you'd only really ever go for him if you don't have Solanke ready. But of course, we got confirmation today that I think the injury is actually pretty minor. So, worst case, I suppose he has managed minutes for Burnley, but he should start. And then also, he should really play Game 28. So, I think it is very restrictive in the sense that actually it's just Marcus Tavernier. But I think another question that you could ask is it even worthwhile to go for him? Because there have been times of the season where his minutes have been suspect. Like he's only played 1,600 minutes so far. Some of the other midfielders have clocked, less than 1,100.
Hmm.
And of course, you've got, Billing too, technically. But yeah, I think it's very tough to pick. I think Tavernier is interesting because he's also on some set pieces. And I'm not going to talk about penalties, if Solanke's out. I just don't think it's a relevant discussion. But yeah, I think the concern is that we have seen, for example, where there were midweek fixtures in the past, I have seen Marcus unfortunately drop out in some of the Premier League fixtures. So if you actually look at his history, you'll see, for example, he does come off the bench sometimes. And that would be, catastrophic in the sense that you're bringing in a player for Game Week 28 who also blanks in Game Week 29. So I think the discussion is whether you want to go for that upside. And the only thing I'd also add is that in that sort of position and in that sort of price point, you also have Ross Barkley. So for the people who are free hit 34ing,
Yeah.
he should also come into your sort of decision making as well.
That's actually a great point because he is one of my choices. I am planning on doing Wang to Son, But
Hmm.
in case I don't wildcard in 28, I'm also strongly considering Barkley just because he has 4 games in 3 game weeks,
Yeah, yeah,
which is not that common because a lot of these teams are not. I mean, Bournemouth is not playing in 29, so essentially you have 3 fixtures for 3 game weeks for Bournemouth. But interestingly, for Bournemouth strikers or Bournemouth forwards, before we move on to Liverpool, I just wanted to mention that Semenyo seems to be nailed on if in case Solanke is ruled out, right? Because Unal also got a shoulder injury, I think,
yeah.
and that just means that would you go for Semenyo if Solanke is ruled out? Because I know you didn't go for Solanke on wildcard 26.
Yeah, I mean, if I would only go for him if Solanke's ruled out for 28. But yeah, I would go Semenyo. I think I probably would have to actually.
Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to get your thoughts
Hmm.
on Semenyo because unless, as you said, we know for sure that Solanke is going to miss all 3 games, it doesn't seem worthwhile risk to bring him in.
Yeah,
The next one we wanted to talk about was Liverpool defense. So as we know, Trent is out for longer. Alisson is not going to be back till 31st of March, I believe. So we are really left with a weakened Liverpool defense and also them having to play one of Kwanzaa or Joe Gomez and Van Dijk, who is the only consistent centre back or defender that they have, along the likes of Bradley and Robertson. And Simicas is also back, and Simicas is also starting to have better minutes as he's come back. So, would you go for someone like Robertson on or Van Dijk?
yeah, that's an interesting point because I think obviously people running souls will see Robertson. But I have a hard time believing that Robertson will play all the fixtures, and particularly maybe some of the easier fixtures too, where Simicast should on paper be able to come in because they will be continually involved in cup competitions. I suppose it depends on what Klopp's preferences. You know, for example, if there's an FA Cup fixture and he sees it as an opportunity to rotate, it's more than likely, of course, that just means more Robertson for the league because that's probably Liverpool's priority this season. So, you know, from that point of view, I think that's nice for Robertson. But at the same token, Tsimikas has played moderately well this season. So you could argue that this could be one of the seasons where you'd expect that the minutes would be a little bit more balanced than in previous years, where Simicast was basically warming up the bench for 90 minutes, and you'd never see really a sniff of Simicast in the league or even in some cup matches. This season has been quite different. So I don't know if you have sort of an update or thought on that, but that just leads me towards just thinking Van Dijk's the one. Or, of course, if let's say there's some horrific Trent news, I mean, Bradley's just at a ridiculous price, to be quite honest. So he's for me the pick that I would go with if there was really bad Trent news. But you know, because he feels like such a short term pick, and unfortunately the short term fixtures for Liverpool are actually bad. It feels like you can't really go there.
Absolutely. I also agree with the fact that Robertson might not play every single game or the speculation. And Simicas is really such a drop off, right? So that I think is the big factor that we all know that we've all gone for Simicas at various points during the last couple of seasons, but that was with the knowledge that they don't have an alternative or they don't have a viable alternative. Unfortunately, Joe Gomez has played well enough at left back this season, and he has also played at centre back when needed during his time at Liverpool. So I would just avoid Liverpool defense at this point. For example, I have Van Dijk, and I was looking into how I can maneuver around free 29, and I'm just finding it to be very tedious. One, because you already pointed out that the fixtures are bad enough, or they are not great, I would say,
Yeah,
and the fact that they are in every single cup competition. So the xMins are just building up. I mean, it's a good sign that he got subbed at 45. I guess no one asked him. No one asked Klopp about Van Dijk's 45-minute sub. So I am assuming that everything is okay, but we'll see.
yeah. No, it's a good point. And yeah, you're right. Obviously about Gomez too. I mean, we saw Gomez play versus Luton, so yeah, even more reason I suppose to just lay off Robertson for a bit. Um, I think you'd only go for Robertson if you were, let's say, going for a wildcard 27 free hit 29 strategy. So a very,
Hmm.
very niche sort of pick to own and to think about. But all these sort of things are quite interesting, right? Because very soon we'll be wildcarding, and anyone who's, let's say, planning to still, you know, play around free at 29 on a wildcard, you have to take that into consideration. Of course, even City defense, might seep through into our discussions next week. The next topic of point is going to be,
Sorry, Fran, before we move on, I
yeah,
forgot to ask you about what would you set Tavernier's minutes as
on,
for
yeah, it's a good
for the
point.
double game?
I would actually just set it at 72, 75. I think that might be a little bit optimistic, but I think it's very likely. If you also look at, for example, the FA Cup fixture, he was rested, right?
Hmm.
So the way I see it, he's definitely going to clock a 90 in the first fixture. And then in the second leg, like maybe in the worst case, of course, he's on the bench. Then you obviously assign a probability that he would very well start that second game, but maybe, of course, come off the bench or rather,
Yeah.
get benched within the game. So I kind of like, I think maybe 75 could be optimistic, but I think that's quite healthy. And he could very well, overachieve that, as I said, because of that FA Cup rest, which is actually a really nice aspect to that. But then another thing you want to think about too, I guess, is is that mid spot useful for you? Because I think when we're thinking about Gameweek 29 as well, sometimes what I like to think is the only players that we really want to have to sort of cover off, I suppose, the threats are players like Bowen, players like Watkins, these attackers, and I guess Tavernier would block or necessitate potentially another midfield transfer on top of that, on Game Week 29 if you kind of need to
Yeah.
force your hand. So that's like an additional sort of point in consideration for some managers. But yeah, I don't know what would you assign his minutes as?
I'm pretty close to what you are. I was putting his minutes right now at 70
Mm-hmm.
across the two games, so average of 70 minutes.
Yeah.
And for Senesi, I was using not quite as aggressive a decay as when players are on 4 yellow cards and the threshold is 5.
Right.
But whatever is the probability that he gets a yellow card, I'm just using that. And I think it comes to something like 78 for the first game because there's also some built in probability that he gets subbed off early.
Yep.
As long as it's above 60, review considers the clean sheet points, so that doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the
Definitely.
second, yeah, and then the second fixture is it was around 72 or something. So that's just what I'm running with right now. And I guess because you already own him, you're not that bothered
Yeah,
about.
I'm not too bothered. So obviously
Yeah,
I'm
exactly. Yeah,
biased in a sense. I'm not out here telling people to buy Senesi, but yeah, I mean I've already sort of I have to just lie in my bed basically. I'm in that
yeah,
position.
yeah.
Whereas
And
some people can
also,
make wiser decisions.
it's just like the Walker pick, right? When Walker was just in that zone of unpredictability where you didn't know why he wasn't starting.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people like me went for Ake over Walker, and then whoever owned Walker for the double game week really profited from
Yeah.
uh, people going for other players in defense. So it could very well turn out to be a situation like that where people that already own Senesi will obviously play him and could very well benefit from two clean sheets or two appearances of 90 minutes each.
Yeah, or like we said, like in the double game week, you can own Ederson, who basically doesn't
Yeah,
get
yeah,
benched. Same with
yeah,
Bournemouth, so that could be nice.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, so the next topic is going to be about Salah. Now, obviously, I think the key thing here is that we have press conferences that will come out, and that should give us information over Porro, over Richarlison, over Salah,
Mm.
over
Yeah.
Solanke as well, just to reaffirm the news that we got tonight. But I think with Salah, the question is it worth it? Let's say if you're wildcarding this week, or think about transfers this week, to pull the trigger on a Salah move. Say if you own someone like KDB, or say if you're wildcarding right now and you have to pick between Salah and Holland, like, are you is your hand forced basically?
So that's sorry, you cut out in the middle. Could you just repeat the last part of the sentence?
Yeah, so my question is, I guess, is if you're wild carding or you're trying to set up your team for the future. Maybe
Yeah.
of course it's different if you own KDB because I think I'd probably keep KDB in this instance. But let's say you're wild carding this week, your team necessitates a wild card. You're planning for free at 29. Would you force Salah within your draft? Is sort of my question.
Unless we hear from Klopp where he says that Salah is fit enough to start,
Mm-hmm.
my answer is no.
Yeah.
And I know people are going to tell me that he always does well against Man City, and I know he does because he's a good player. That has nothing to do with the fact that he keeps doing well against City. He keeps doing well against every Premier League opposition.
Yeah.
It's because he's good. So
Shocker.
yeah, exactly. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, I know that there are some teams where Alan Shearer has spoken about it, and when I hear a player who has scored the most goals in PL history, I do give some weightage to the fact that he used to say that there are certain opposition where he used to feel like
Yeah.
he's up for it, and I do understand that, and that could very well be Salah's. But at the end of the day, we can't predict any of that, so we have to go with what we know from the outside. And as long as he is not fit enough to play 90 minutes, I'm not going anywhere near Salah. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, given the fact that he has a blank in 29 anyway.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because it was something that I was thinking about. Let's say you have, less money in the bank, you suddenly can't afford, a Holland plus Salah draft. You are kind
Mm.
of forced to choose one premium on a wildcard 27. So the only thing I was thinking about, would be, is it worth the sacrifice to, prevent yourself from booking transfers later down the line to move Holland to Salah? Because obviously us natural sort of playing players will go take Holland out of the team on gaming 28 or 29, and then transfer in Salah, sorry, in gaming 30. Whereas if you're wildcarding, I think you'd like to circumvent that if possible, but then you're also losing a Holland captaincy versus United, and I think that is. It's not even just an effective ownership argument. It's just that fixture just does look so plumb. Like I think it's very hard. And it also speaks towards why you should probably wait to wildcard 28 to wildcard. Because I just think 27, unfortunately, we're just missing a lot of information. We're not going to get any additional information in terms of 34, 37, for example, probabilities. But yeah, unfortunately, the key players in the game still play and have good fixtures. And for example, when you look at Foden, when you look at Walker within your team, or rather Ake, Walker, of course, in my previous team, but also definitely on some other teams, a lot of us still own Liverpool and City assets. It probably just doesn't make overall sense to wildcard on 27 unless you're just in a very, very dire spot when it comes to injuries and so on and so forth. Next piece is going to be on the Wolves attack. Do you want to sort of discuss what's your thoughts are on the Wolves attack right now?
Yeah, so Wang was ruled out. Just if anyone doesn't know that he got injured during the FA Cup game against Brighton. Wolves won that game, and that was another blow for people that went with Wangi Chan. So not only do we have to replace him now, it's also a question of what happens in his absence, right? So
Mm-hmm.
first thing is Gary O'Neill said that it would be a miracle if Wang plays in game week 27. So I'm assuming that he's not going to play. Secondly, if Wang is not on penalties, we are assuming that it's 100% with Sarabia.
Mm-hmm.
So spoke with Fran before we started streaming, and I would increase Sarabia's minutes from, let's say, mid 70s to low 80s, or probably high 80s. Now that there's less competition, I'm assuming Bellegarde plays in
Yep,
place of Wang. I don't know if they have any other options, but I'm assuming that's what's going to happen.
it will be.
Uh, exactly. And Fran owns both Pedro Neto and Wang. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I think this sort of X-Men's discussion is more about how you plan your future transfers, right?
Yeah.
Because the issue with someone like Huang is his fixture is actually even better on Give Me 28. So the question, of course, with Huang is not necessarily whether he's going to play for me this week, it's actually whether he's going to play for me next week. And obviously, I don't think there's any need to jump onto a Wolves attacker necessarily, but the key thing, I suppose, if I was to talk about impacts, is of course, I feel a little bit better about owning Neto because he played center forward for Brighton. There's always going to be some sort of positive boosts to that. I don't think he's going to get an additional weightage of penalty share. However, that's just a nice little thing to have, right? It's just like when, for example, we saw EV boosts for Richarlison when he moved back to center forward, or Son, for example, when he was playing center forward, and the list goes on, historically speaking. With Huang, though, as I said, yeah, I think we need to try and get news from the press conference to try and understand whether he will play on Gaming 28. Because for most managers, I think it would make sense to actually keep Huang in your team. Now, of course, if you have something as simple as Huang to Sun as the transfer option, then it's a no-brainer. You don't have to think about it. But for me, for example, where I have players like Fernandes who doesn't have a good game on Gaming 28, I have Neto and I have Huang. It actually suddenly leads me towards a situation where I probably am minded to sell Huang regardless. But
Hmm.
not everyone's going to be in that sort of delicate position like myself. So I think you could probably practice a bit of patience, unless, of course, the Gary O'Neill news over Huang isn't great. And who knows, right? Because obviously, whenever you have an injury or something like that, that can always mean that his minutes on Gameweek 28 get impacted negatively. So I think I'm a
So
bit sour
I
on
just
him.
wanted to ask you one thing. So you said that United have a bad fixture. I don't think
On
Everton at
27,
home is
sorry.
that bad.
Sorry, on
Yeah,
27.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was
because
thinking
I
about
was thinking
27
like,
in terms of my team this week.
yeah,
It's pretty horrible. Yeah.
this week is I understand because your plan must have been to play double Wolves midfield against Newcastle away, and now that Wang is injured, you either have to move him on or you have to play Bruno Fernandes against City away, which is, I mean, what is his EV out of curiosity? Because I
I
haven't
think
checked.
like
3
3.4
point? Yeah. Okay.
or 3.8. It's not great. Yeah.
But it's not that bad though, right? I mean, most of the players against City away, you would expect their EV to be really,
Yeah, it's not bad.
really bad.
But is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
EV real? No, I'm kidding. But
That, is Bruno Fernandes real? Because
yeah.
apparently he can never get injured, right? He can only play act. So that's, I've been really not salty. I've been angry about that this week
Yeah.
with
Um
all the narrative. Anyway, uh, I think that's all about X-Men's Corner. We will refine this section as and when we move on every week. I think we
yep.
will have more things to talk about. It's just that this week is particularly weird in terms of no press conferences between the FA Cup and the game week deadline. So it's just we are in some sort of what do you embargoed state, you could say.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. Um, Actually, one last thing I wanted to discuss is just Spurs defenders, and but also approach to Spurs defenders in general, or approach to triple Spurs for people who are on free at 34. Um, What's interesting is actually I've run some wildcard salts in Game 27, and actually, of course, because you have such a good fixture like Crystal Palace at home, you're actually encouraged to go triple Spurs on both variations. The free at 29 and the free at 34 variation. But I'm sure by the time wildcard 28 comes around, because your front loaded fixture is Aston Villa away, that's not suddenly an option anymore. So I think it will suddenly change to where you probably will have triple Spurs once again on the free at 34 variant, but not the free at 29 variant. What I think is interesting though is we do need to be thinking about this week with whatever information we get from Ange over, let's say, Richarlison, Porro, and these sorts of players. How you're actually going to go about Spurs, because they will be quite influential later on in terms of the double game weeks. Whether, of course, some of the sort of rescheduled fixtures or set to be rescheduled fixtures will fall in 34/37. But in the short term, like let's say if you're a 3 at 34 minded player, you need to think about whether you're actually going for something like a triple Spurs midfield, or you're actually, for example, a little bit more flexible and you have, for example, money in the bank to actually go for Porro. Because if Udogi is fit and he's available for 27 and Porro isn't, I think you kind of have to take that sort of cash grab there, and sort of move towards that structure. But in general, because Spurs are still a good team, and for me, like from a price efficiency point of view, a team that I don't mind being invested in as someone who's planning for 3 at 34. I think I'm still planning for triple Spurs midfield. So the way I see it is either I make a move towards Richarlison this week or Madison, but then when it comes to Game 29, even when you look at, for example, free hit teams, triple Spurs is still the best option and best solution. Um, you're obviously hedging very much towards a certain outcome, and we've seen a lot of managers do that before and it hasn't worked out brilliantly, but that is something I think people want to think about. What do you think about the idea of sort of spreading yourself, in terms of probabilities? Like, let's say having one defender and two attackers as opposed to three attackers. What do you think about like that sort of accumulation of expected value?
Yeah. So first of all, we have to point out that Richarlison's injury situation is a
Unknown.
little
Yeah.
murky right now. So just wait for the press conference. There is
Um,
no use speculating. We will probably hear from Ange before the deadline. So you will have your answer most likely. There could be a small chance that they could decide on the day of the fixture whether to play him or not. So uh, you could make your decision based on that. I mean, Son is first choice, obviously. If you want to go for a midfielder and you have enough cash, just go for Son and push the decision to get Richarlison or another Spurs asset down the road. But as Fran pointed out, I'm just a little worried about Udogi's minutes in the long run
mm-hmm.
because this is his second injury that he's come back from, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's not that major of an injury, I know, but I'm just saying that the accumulation of fatigue can manifest in different ways. I don't know what's going to happen in his case. And also, the center backs have not been fit enough to go on for the season. So I'm just a little perplexed about who to go for in terms of a Spurs defender. Unless, of course, in the press conference, Ange comes out and says that Poro is close to being back. In which case, I think on 28, I would still go for Poro over Udogi. I mean, assuming that they are both fit. If Poro is not fit, obviously I will have to go for Udogi. But my plan right now is to go for one defender and two midfielders. The second midfielder is up for grabs. If Richarlison is fit, then it will be him. Otherwise, I will reluctantly have to go for Madison, I think. And I'm assuming that is also your backup plan in case Richarlison is not fit.
Yeah, I'm actually planning to, I think, go Madison. As long as I
Hmm.
know that Huang is going to come back for 28, I'll go Madison. But there is a world where if Richarlison is out and if Madison, um, unfortunately, yeah, so my team situation is a little bit different. So I do want to be clear that I think Richarlison and Madison, I think are quite interchangeable as
Yeah.
picks. But in my team situation, I can't afford Huang to Madison. I can only afford Huang to Richarlison. So because of that sort of context, it's nice for me to go Huang to Richarlison. But if he's out, obviously I have to go Bruno to Madison, which actually makes my team in theory worse for Gameweek 28 because I'm suddenly losing Bruno on that fixture. So that's something I need to kind of consider about because yes, of course, it's ideal for me to go triple Spurs by 29, but how I go about it is interesting. And of course, what I've been also seeing too with Souls and a lot of wildcard 26ers is that they're considering going Palmer over, let's say, Richarlison and Madison because his expected value is so insane. And for a lot of people who wildcarded like myself and are planning through at 34, actually, we don't own Palmer and we probably won't own Palmer either for Gaming 30 versus Burnley at home. So that's actually a huge um, problem,
Age.
from an expected value point of view within our
Yeah.
teams. And it might actually make more sense, even though intuitively you're losing, one additional fixture on Gaming 29 for one player, that you might go Palmer as well and consider him over, let's say, Richarlison and Madison. But yeah, going back to my team, I'll have to make these sort of decisions because, of course, if Huang can't come back on 28 and I lose Bruno as well, it doesn't make sense for me to go Madison. I might actually have to sort of redirect my strategy around and actually consider a Palmer move, one that would be a little bit more better for short term expected value, but one that could also just sort of pivot my strategy, more towards free at 29, which, I'll have to manage that too.
Yeah, but absolutely, that makes sense. So let's move on to the last section, which is, of course, captaincy for Game Week 27. And the top three choices are Holland, Saka, and Son.
Yeah.
And we have seen the ridiculous exploits of Saka in the past couple of weeks. It seems it's impossible to stop him. Even if you know what he's going to do, he still does the same thing and continues to score, chopping in on his left foot from the right wing. So, as impressive as he's been, what are your thoughts on captaining Saka ahead of Holland? Because I'm still captaining Holland, I think.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, there's obviously the expected value answer, which you gave basically.
Yeah.
But then also it's just if KDB's fit, I think that's small intangible. That sort of adds towards Holland's favor. And I don't know. Like, I mean, United, their defense, the injuries that they have, it's so hard to find a reason, you know, beyond just expected value to go for Saka as an option. Other than you have tremendous faith that Sheffield United are just a bad team, which they are. But yeah, because United have been so bad this season, because there's so many injuries, and because it's probably going to be a full strength City team, I can't see myself swerving a Holland captaincy.
And also one thing is this is a I don't think this can be simulated, but I would be interested to understand. So as you pointed out, KDB being back or being in the team does impact Holland
Hmm.
in terms of overall creativity,
Yeah,
but it also dents Holland's bonus points potential because
true.
one assist from KDB is good enough for him to get three bonus points. And of course, there's Rodri as well who does
Yeah, but
similar
what
kind
what
of
about
value as well.
scoring goals for my man Holland instead of assisting Foden?
Oh yeah,
No,
yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
joking.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so all I'm saying is, as Fran has already pointed out, it pains me to say that United at home for City is a really good fixture and really hard to not captain Holland this week. Maybe I'm too scarred from continuously backing against Sheffield United and coming up empty-handed, including the Son captaincy from early on in the season. So maybe I am biased, a little biased in that way. But the expected value, as Fran said, does support captaining Holland. So I think I'm going to stick to that.
What do you think about? So I think Rob T has also made some discussion points about how some of the team models that we have from some of the experts that we have within the community are slightly different to the spread odds, right? For goal concession projections for Sheffield United. I think our team models are a little bit more reserved, whereas it seems like the spread odds just generally think that they're opening the floodgates for any team that basically plays them. Have you
Yeah.
have you looked into that? Like, what do you think about that in general?
So it's so funny. I also looked into the rolling XG calendar that Chase publishes,
Yep.
and aren't Sheffield United mid table on that graphic? They're like 10th, I think, on
Mm-hmm.
XGC.
I haven't
So
checked the latest iteration, but you might be
yeah, I
right.
think in the latest iteration they are 10th, if I'm not wrong, or at least they're mid table, is what I mean to say. And
Yep, they
that
are
is,
mid-table, firmly mid-table.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was extremely shocking to me. And the only explanation I can come up with is the fact that they don't have enough rolling months. Because
Yep.
if you look at the calendar, obviously they played in the championship for a, a part of that calendar. So it makes sense that they still are gathering data, and by the time they finish gathering data, they will be out of the league again. So this cycle is just going to keep repeating that. Even if they come back again, we're going to go through the same cycle. So I do understand that the anomaly is partially caused by that. And I'm assuming that some of the models that use rolling, because it has to be a part of many modelers data set, which is rolling XG or projected XG direction. So what do you project the XG to go? Like, do you expect it to go up, go down, and that would determine their defensive strength? What I would assume. So in that case, I can understand why they are not as bullish or as bearish on Sheffield United, but you can understand why market odds are right. They are meant to be grassy, and we've seen that in the past, let's say 5 to 10 years, they have adopted analytics in a big way. So we don't see those kind of edges anymore, where you clearly know that if you are a data modeler, you can get an edge over the market.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that there are some of these events where potentially you can have the market going all in against Sheffield United a bit too much. So
Yep.
data modelers, I would advocate mixing all these data sources to see what you get and then varying the weightages, because that's what we do essentially on the review as well. Because I've this season I've never used less than 25% odds on review. I don't know about you. I think you must have used some sort of odds as well, right, in
I
your
so
testing.
I do what I have always done, where I kind of just look at 100 odds and just pure MD, just to kind of see what the difference are
Sense
in
check.
terms of
Okay.
players and
Yeah.
also captaincy. But generally, I think I tend to lean with just MD. So at the end of the day, it ends up being a mix, obviously, because sometimes
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
make decisions outside of review. But yeah, I think right now on market versus MD, it's actually still the same order of the three players that we have. But the only thing that I could mention is that with Sun, you could be looking at a huge boost for him playing center forward and potentially having sole ownership of pens as we would expect. So that could be a nice little boost. But then also just quality of fixture still feels like it's leaning towards, City and Holland, where I mean United, God, they're a shocking defense again, even from just XGC and just where they sort of rank on that sort of league table. But yeah, it's not particularly close, is it, between, let's say, even Sun versus Osaka and Holland this week? I think the fixtures are just too good for the first two options.
Oh, one thing I remembered, and just to let people know, if anyone owns Mark Gahey out there for Crystal Palace, he is going to be out for much longer than they initially anticipated. So there was talk that he was going to be back last week. It got postponed, and now seems like he's going to be out on the sidelines for a long time, which does impact Crystal Palace's defense. But at the same time, they are playing three at the back now, so it's a whole different game now, and which whatever projections people have about uh, playing against Crystal Palace, I would take that with a pinch of salt, because new manager and new tactics, not had we've not had enough time to really gauge what they are going to be. So I think odds do help out in situations like these.
It's a good point. Yeah, because obviously it'd be a
Yeah.
bit more sensitive. Cool. Well, I think that's it in terms of the captaincy segment this week. Do you have any sort of other closing thoughts?
Not really, just thanking everyone who joined us today. I know we are usually streaming quite late, especially GMT. So appreciate anyone who joined us. Pras joined us for a bit. So great to have him. There was a question in the chat, and I think Fran has already answered it. So
Yeah.
we don't need to go through the chat questions today. So thank you everyone for joining us. On your way out, if you could just subscribe, like this video, and this will be up on podcasting platforms tomorrow, so do give it a listen if you are an avid listener of the pod, as many are on Spotify. We've had a fair few listeners there, so appreciate your continuous support.
All right. Thank you guys. Take